Assalamu alaikum. During the course of a discussion, I was confronted with a question like this, that the Muslims believe in the theory of abrogation. That is, certain early verses of the Quran, which were mansukh, were abrogated by later revealed verses. Now, does this imply that God was wrong and later corrected the verses?
The sisters asked the question that there are certain Muslims who believe in the abrogation theory, and certain verses were revealed later on, and the earlier verses were abrogated. So is there a contradiction in the Holy Quran? And did Allah make a mistake and then correct it? Sister, the theory of abrogation is derived from a verse in the Holy Quran, from Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse number 106, which says that we cause not any verse or any revelation to be abrogated or forgotten, but we substitute it with things similar or better. And Allah has power over all things. The same message is repeated again in Surah Nahl, chapter 16, verse number 101, that Allah does not cause to be forgotten, but He substitutes it with things better or similar. The Arabic word here is ayah, which can be translated as revelation, also as signs, as verses. If we take it as a revelation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't cause the previous revelations to be forgotten, but substitute it with revelations which are better or similar, but naturally it refers to that the previous revelations, the Torah, the Zabur, the Injil, they have been substituted by the last and final revelation, the Holy Quran, which, but natural, no Muslim should have objection to. If you take the meaning as ayah, as verses of the Quran only, then the Quran will say that we do not cause any verses of the Holy Quran to be forgotten, but we substitute it with something better or similar. If we take ayah as verses of the Holy Quran, that means other verses have been revealed which are better or similar. But this does not mean that the verse which was revealed earlier no longer holds good today, and it contradicts. There are many Muslims who misunderstand this second interpretation, and they say it means that the verses that were revealed earlier, they have been abrogated. They no longer hold good, we should not follow it. We have to follow that same verse dealing with the same topic which was revealed later on. And they feel that the verse revealed earlier contradicts with the verse which was revealed later. Therefore, we Muslims should only follow the later verse and not the first verse. There is a little bit of misunderstanding about this concept. Let me give you an example. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals certain things. Later on, He reveals verses dealing with the same topic, with the same subject. But that does not mean there is a contradiction. He gives you additional information. After giving that additional information, the verses that were revealed later on is sufficient to speak about that subject. But that does not mean it contradicts with the early verses. Let me give you an example. That regarding the challenge which I mentioned in one of my answers, that produce a surah like it. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the challenge to the humankind in Surah Isra, chapter 17, verse 88, that if all the human beings and the jinns, they got together, they would not be able to produce a recital like the Holy Quran. The same message is repeated in Surah Tur, chapter 52, verse 34, that you cannot produce the Holy Quran, even if all the men and jinns got together. You can't produce the Holy Quran. Then the challenge is made easier in Surah Hud, chapter 11, verse number 13, that you will not be able to produce even 10 surahs. Then further on in Surah Yunus, chapter 10, verse 38, the challenge is further simplified. You can't even produce one surah. And in Surah Baqarah, chapter 2, verse number 23-24, which I recited earlier, the challenge is made more easier, that you will not be able to produce a surah somewhat similar to the Holy Quran. Surah Yunus chapter 10 verse 38 says, can't produce a surah like the Quran. Surah Baqarah chapter 2 verse 23-24 says, you can't even produce a surah somewhat similar to the Holy Quran. The challenge is made easier. That does not mean that the earlier challenge does not hold good. Suppose if I tell a person who's dumb, who is ignorant, that you dumb person, you can't even pass standard 10. Then after a few minutes I realize he's more dumb. I tell him, you can't even pass standard 5. Then I say, you can't even pass standard 1. Then I say, you can't even pass the nursery, KG. That does not mean I'm contradicting. But my last statement, that you can't even pass nursery, includes the first three statements. When I say you can't pass nursery, it's taken for granted you can't even pass standard 1, standard 5 and standard 10. That does not mean it's contradicting. When I say you can't pass standard 10, you can't pass standard KG, it's not contradicting. Contradiction is something which you can't follow simultaneously. If you can follow simultaneously both the verses of the Quran, it's not a contradiction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simplifying the challenge. Some people say, no, the first verse of Surah Isra chapter 17 verse 88 is wrong, it should not be followed today. They don't understand. They think it's a contradiction because of the lack of understanding. It's not a contradiction. Contradiction is something which is opposing. Let me give you one more example. The prohibition of intoxicants in the Quran came down in stages. The first verse dealing with intoxicants was Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2 verse number 219, which says that when they ask thee concerning wine and gambling, tell them in it is loss and profit. But the loss is more than the profit. The next verse dealing with intoxicants, see, the prohibition came in stages. Why? Because to reform the Arab society, it had to be done in stages. They were alcoholics, they were drunkards. It was difficult to reform them. It came in stages. The next verse dealing with intoxicants was of Surah Nisa chapter 4 verse 43, which says that do not pray with your mind befogged. While praying, having intoxicants is haram. And the final prohibition was revealed, that's mentioned in Surah Ma'idah chapter 5 verse number 90, which says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe, innamal khamru wal maisiru, most certainly intoxicants and gambling, wal anzabu wal azlamu, dedication of stones, divination of arrows, rushtum min amali shaitan, these are Satan's handiwork. Fashtanibu lalakum tuflihun. Abstain from such handiwork that you may prosper. After this verse was revealed, there was total prohibition of alcohol, 100%. That does not mean that this verse contradicts with the early verse. Even the early verse is correct, that in the alcohol there is loss and profit. The loss is more than profit. It's not nullified. Even the second revelation, Surah Nisa chapter 4 verse 43 says that do not pray with your mind befogged whole goods. What people are misunderstanding, that if the Quran says do not pray with your mind befogged, that means if you're not praying, alcohol is allowed. That's the misunderstanding. If the Quran would have said that do not pray with your mind befogged and you can have alcohol when you're not praying, then there's a contradiction. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most wise. He knows what He's going to reveal. He can't make a mistake. So that to bring the prohibition in stages, at that time only having alcohol during salah was prohibited. Quran does not say other time it's halal, it's silent. If you would have mentioned while not praying you can have alcohol and then afterwards say it is prohibited for always, then there's a contradiction. So people, because they can't reason out the compatibility between the two verses, they have come out that it contradicts, therefore you should not follow the other verses. For example, if I tell my friend that see, when you're touring, don't go to New York. Then I tell him, don't go to USA. Then I say, don't go to America, the continent of America. I'm not contradicting. I'm giving him more and more information. First I'm saying, don't go to New York, don't go to USA, don't go to America. But when I say, don't go to the continent of America, even USA is included. Even Canada is included. Even New York is included. If I say, don't go to continent of America, it is sufficient enough. I need not again say, don't go to USA or don't go to New York. Therefore, when Quran says that alcohol is totally prohibited, it includes Surah Nisa chapter 4, 43, that even while praying it is haram. But that does not mean it's contradicting. It's giving you more information. Therefore, anyone who says that the verses of Quran contradict, that's the meaning of abrogation theory, then they have failed to understand the Quran, because the Quran says in Surah Nisa chapter 4 verse 82, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Do not they consider the Quran with care? Had it been from anyone besides Allah, there would have been many contradictions. So there is something like mansukh, but mansukh does not mean contradicting, it means better information. I hope that answers the question.